How do you possibly cover 10 days worth of news that's loaded with news in 30 minutes? We'll do it next on Locked On Jazz. Bum 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 pow.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
How are you? I am David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider, and this is Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight and expertise and geeky numbers, and it's great to be back. Today, we'll touch on all the news over the last 10 days. Leafs been amazing. TV deal. THT opted in last night. Impact of that. John Collins is a member of the Utah Jazz. We drafted 3 players. And we'll look at why I like what we did. It fits some molds of what I think are successful drafts. And we will do all of that in the next 30 minutes. Thanks so much for tuning in. As I mentioned, this is Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Give you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, and hopefully making it way better to be a Jazz fan each and every day. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all podcasting apps and on YouTube. Here's my question for you today on YouTube. What is the biggest news that I missed? Is it the TV deal? Is it THT opting in? Is it the John Collins trade? Is it the 3 draft picks of the Utah Jazz? Wow, Leaf Talen was amazing. Absolutely amazing work by Leaf Talen. I was in Scotland with my daughter on a golf graduation trip, and I actually tuned in and listened to Locked On Jazz every day. Thanks to all the guys who came on as guests as well, Tony and Andy. Really, I thought it was great, and I loved being up to date with it and everything. All right, we got to delve right in today. So first, the TV deal. It's incredible. Ryan Smith is just committed, absolutely committed to making sure that the fan experience is great. He fundamentally believes that if you can have an elite level fan experience, that then the fandom follows, that positive things follow. The user experience is great, and positive things happen after that. And this new TV deal is the essence of that. I'm excited to see what the new content's going to be, the exclusive content, some other things they're doing, and what Smith Entertainment Group's TV group puts together by Ryan, which hopefully, may involve an NHL franchise at some point. Obviously, already has the soccer franchise. So I think there's a lot of, Ryan's just pushing us into new realms. It was interesting. I was with a group in it was called the Friendship Cup. Mark Levitt, Mike Levitt's brother out of Cedar City, kind of has organized and built this things with the Scots. It's really cool. I'll tell you guys more about it on a day we don't have as much news, but it was interesting. Kind of the number one question I got was like, what's Ryan Smith's ownership been like, and what's it like? And I'm like, it's awesome. So it was really, this is a tip of that. I never thought the day would come where we would do this again. I really didn't. It's a tip of the hat to that. And then I'm super interesting to watch what the streaming services are, because frankly, I don't, as of right now, I don't have bunny ears, and I don't get KJazz because KJazz doesn't stream, and I'm on YouTube TV and DirecTV stream. So I'm still waiting for the next shoe to drop personally. But everything so far, just the fact that we're at that stage is amazing. All right, let's move to the next one. We are flying today. I'm going to try to get in depth in the midst of just flying. Leaf has done such an amazing job. If I just do a brief overview, I'll let you down today. So last night, Taylor and Horton Tucker opted in. I'm a little surprised, actually. But this new CBA is driving things in a very different manner than what we've seen. And that is just, there's not a lot of cap space out there right now, right? The Jazz used a bunch of their cap space for John Collins. Oklahoma City used a bunch of their cap space taking Davis Bertans to move in the draft. We're seeing teams eat up their space and not necessarily do it through free agency. And I think Talen might have found himself on the wrong side of free agency. And he also has just a really good opportunity in Utah. He's still at an opportunity stage. Remember, he's younger than Ochai Agbaji. I think this is a really interesting one. We think of Ochai Agbaji as young, this young player that we have in his second year, and we got to make sure we clear a bunch of room for development. Talen Horton Tucker is the exact same age. It's an interesting question, actually, of which of those two showed more last year for a bright future, Talen or Ochai Agbaji? And you don't have to have either or. They're not positioned in that manner. But it's still, I think, if you think about them as the exact same age, which they are, which one of those has a bigger upside? Talen probably has some. It's interesting. He's so powerful and so explosive, and at the same time, I think could probably slim down a little bit. And you wonder if he slims down, does he lose some of that power? Because if he gets his shoulder by you, he's killing you. He's got to become a better rim finisher. But there are a bunch of aspects in his game, and he's got to become a better shooter, right? Though Ochai, when we increased his load at the end of the year, was not as good a shooter as he was early, or middle, because remember, early he was really bad, then middle. So it's interesting to me, at least, that I don't know. I think that I don't think that's completely cut and dry, that Ochai Agbaji is 100% the better prospect than Talen Horton Tucker at this point in their careers. And they're virtually the same age. Actually, Talen's younger. So it's great. I think another player on the timeline growing with the Jazz, showing a lot of prospect, and the Jazz get him for another year. Is good. The other thing that's good about this, frankly, from a maneuvering standpoint, is what the Jazz are beginning to do is get a bunch of tradable contracts, right? And if Talen Horton, if Jordan Clarkson moves in free agency, I saw Ben Anderson point out Walker Kessler will have the longest tenure of any Jazz player. It's crazy. Tip of the hat to Ben Anderson. He did great work during the draft. And I think that when you start realizing how much player movement and Danny's willingness to move and Justin Zanik's willing to move players, so now all of a sudden, like, Colin Sexton has a movable contract. Talen Horton Tucker has a movable contract. John Collins has a movable contract. Like, these become pieces, and we'll see with today's the day on Kelly Olynyk. It's a little bit of a quagmire's too strong a word, kind of, a logjam of players at that position now. But I still expect the Jazz to maybe pick up the Kelly Olynyk option. And partially because of the new CBA, which we'll get into here in a second. And then secondarily, because he's good and he's a ball mover. And then third is it's just another tradable contract. All right. The Jazz got John Collins, and the new CBA, I'll have to do a really boring episode at some point about the new CBA. But the new CBA has two features in it that are really important to understand. And one is this idea of this second apron. And the second, it is punitive to be under the first apron in the NBA right now. It is incredibly restrictive to be over the second apron. In fact, the NBA won't love me saying this, but the second apron gets to be a pretty close, and the second apron is if you're $17 million above the tax. It gets pretty close to a hard tax or hard cap. You can't aggregate salaries and trades. You lose certain tax level exceptions. You can't send out things in trades. You can't sign players who have been signed in trade. Your draft picks get frozen. Like, there's craziness that happens if you're over that second apron at $17 million. The first apron, which is kind of $7 to $8 million above the tax, is a little less onerous than it used to be. So they're kind of what the league's done in this collective bargaining agreement is like, if you're a little bit over the tax, we're okay. But if you're way over the tax, it's incredibly difficult. If you're a repeater, you get crushed. The second thing the league's done is, oh, by the way, it is no longer advantageous to you to have a low salary. In fact, you have to have 90% of the salary cap spent by opening day. It used to be by the trade deadline or other things, or you'd extend people right at it was actually by July 1st. So you'd extend people late in the year and give them a big signing bonus to get this done. It is now at the start of the season. There may be a whole new trade movement right before the start of the season with teams moving to get this. So if you are not at 90% of the salary cap, you have to pay the difference up to 90% to the league. That gets distributed. And most importantly, you get no tax distribution from the teams that are over this tax, which that can be 10, 15, $20 million of just cash that you get as a team. So teams have to get to 90% of the minimum salary now of this, or 90% of the salary of the tax. So the Jazz have to do that too. So John Collins for free is a little bit of a product of this. John Collins for free is that the Atlanta was pushing toward the second apron, had to come off that and had to get out of the tax. Overall, the owner just gave him an edict. You have to do it. Like, you've got to get away from the second apron and you've got to get off the tax. The second thing is the Jazz have to get to 90% of the salary cap or else they lose the tax distribution, which is massive. Like, that's a business issue that's massive. And so in the new collective bargaining agreement. And this allows then, and you're going to see Oklahoma City takes Davis Bertans on the same thing. You are going to see this happening now time and time again in the league where someone's got to get off a player and somebody else takes the player. And it's like a win-win because basically it's for free. It does mean, by the way, this whole idea you used to go get first-round draft picks for taking salary might be out the window because teams have to take salary. So in other words, like Oklahoma City or Utah or San Antonio's had could be sitting there with well under the 90%. And they used to be able to say, well, I want a first-round draft pick if I'm going to take Russell Westbrook's contract or something of that sort, which is kind of what we did. Now, I don't think you're getting that anymore because the team's going to say, okay, if you don't do this, it's going to cost you $15 million of tax distributions or $20 million of tax distributions. It's going to cost us a lot too. And you're just going to decide to swap the player into a spot under the cap to be able to get it there. And this is also going to have a massive impact on competition. That is close to a hard cap, and it is also going to force teams to be good. You are just, it's going to be very difficult for you to be awful. All right, John Collins, what did the Jazz get? Why has he been such an enigma? I called around the league on that, and I'll give you that, and then we'll talk about our draft picks as well coming up here on Locked On Jazz. Today's show is brought to you by our good friends over at Intercap Lending. That's Steve Carter, the single best guy out there. Steve Carter is our own personal loan officer at Intercap Lending. Intercap Lending is hyper flexible. They get the job done. They've been growing fabulously. Why? Because they closed the deal. Steve Carter is the single best customer service person I have ever dealt with in my entire life. And it's such a pleasure for me to send you to Steve Carter. So if you're looking for a loan right now and you're trying to get something done, you would need to be a little bit more creative. I had something recently where I was calling Steve to find out things and see what we could do on it. And he was just great. Walked me through all my different options, thought my route that I was taking was the right one, and he bypassed some business, frankly. He could have it's just unbelievable. So call Steve Carter at 385-800-8528 or email me at dlock09@gmail.com, and I'll get you set up with Steve Carter. Intercap Lending, NMLS number 190465. For more information, visit intercaplending.com. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over at eBay Motors. I just pause for a second because when I think of eBay Motors, I think of the absolutely fabulous checkmark because you get the right parts, the right fit, the right prices at eBay Motors. And what makes eBay Motors so great is they're going to make sure that when you go to eBay Motors, they have over 122 million parts to choose from. So it seems like it's cumbersome, but it's not, because you go into My Garage and you get the green check mark to know what will fit. And then once you've got the green check mark on everything, you know it fits you, or you get your money back. So just like sports, confidence is the name of the game. And when you buy on eBay Motors, despite 122 million parts, it tells you this: you'll know everything's there that you can get. And with a green check mark, you know it's going to fit right. So you win because you bring home a win with right parts guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay. Guaranteed fit. Only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items. Exclusions do apply. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. Greatly appreciate it. And Locked On NBA Big Board is there for you. Tomorrow, Leaf Tulin's going to be back because I'm actually traveling. Still haven't gotten home yet. But there was just so much news, I felt like I needed to jump in. And then Friday, I should be back at it. So, and then I'll be back until about the 10th of July. And then Leaf will take back over for a little while. So I hope you guys are enjoying. I think Leaf's done a great job. And such a big offseason for the Jazz. I didn't want to leave us just kind of with nothing. And there was so much news. I didn't want to keep out shows. So, all right. So John Collins, probably 26 years old. First thing is just right on the right timeline with a bunch of our guys. And certainly he's overpaid at this point for his production of last year. But he did still play 30 minutes a night on an NBA playoff team. Definitely what really happened, by the way, is he jumped from taking 27% of his shots as threes to 34% of his shots as threes, and he stopped making them. He then, in turn, by the way, stopped making some of his twos, but he's a pretty good kind of mid-range player, around-the-basket player, was a very good post-up player last year, 1.07 points on post-ups, 1.06 points on screener. So the real thing that when I looked into John Collins' numbers and then I called around the league is his three-point shooting dipped. There's no signs of physical decline. He's an incredible leaper. He gets over a basket. I think he's got like a 40-inch vertical jump. Like, he's crazy athletic, runs the floor beautifully, little tied up laterally, and had a really bad defensive numbers last year. He might have just been checked out of all the drama in Atlanta with Nate and then with Quinn, and all the times he's been offered to be traded. But this is the challenge for Will Hardy talking around the league. So John Collins is really ultimate tweener. This is what coaches around the league told me in the last 48 hours. So at 6'9", he's really a great roll guy. He can play he's a good screen and roll guy. He was super with Trae Young. He can get up high. He's great on the lob. He is a vertical threat at the rim despite being 6'9". He can pop it a little bit. Super pick and roll player, which means he's got to play the 5. When he's playing and that's what he actually did. His year he averaged 20 and 10. He played a lot of time at the 5 on a not very good team. However, at 6'9", he's in a 6'10" or 6'11" wingspan. He's not a very good rim protector or a very good defensive center. So that now all of a sudden you have this kind of quandary of what are you doing with him? If you play him at the center and you're playing small, he's not great. It's not great defensively. So you're like, all right, well, we'll play him at the 4 where he's better defensively and he fits better. But then he's not able to run the pick and roll where he's at his best, rolling to the basket, getting the switch on the smaller guys in the post is kind of your choice at that point. And he's a pretty good post-up player, but it's not as good. And he actually becomes a stretch 4, and then he's not making his shots. He's not a great shooter. And so people leave him open and clog your system up. So he's a little bit of like he's an offensive 5 and a defensive 4, and he's kind of just the ultimate tweener. And this is going to be Will Hardy's challenge. Like, how do you tap into his superpower, like Will talks about, which is his incredible athleticism, his ability to rim roll, and some of those things, and still be able to not have any of his weaknesses be exposed on the other side. That's what Atlanta began to struggle to be able to do with John Collins. His best statistical year, he played center. He's probably not doing that. What's interesting about us is, can you cover up? Maybe he does play the offensive center, or Will runs a bunch of off-ball screens with Walker Kessler or things like that to get people switched on to John Collins, and then Collins brings the center out, and then he's playing, and can you still do that and not have it be too clogged up? And spacing will be vital with him and Walker. And Lowry, you've got great length. Maybe you can cover up some of the defensive weaknesses because of the fact that he'll be on the floor with longer guys. Like, you're just going to have to figure this out. But that's really kind of the story. I think John Collins is an enigma. Like, he peaks out on my numbers. He looks great. He's got super high shooting percentages. And then, like, Atlanta clearly was like, And it's like, why? Like, what was it that he was missing for him in Atlanta? And the answer that I really got from him was just the ultimate tweener. All right, let's talk about our draft picks. We're just flying today. Hopefully you're enjoying taking all this in. Let me just review my draft philosophy that you've heard from me a lot, but let's just talk about players when you draft them that I like. So I want players with multiple comps. And specifically, I want players whose basements are pretty high. Like, that's my personal thing. When you're drafting, like, if you go draft a guy and say, oh, well, he's the next Andre Miller. Okay, well, there's only been one Andre Miller. If you're not Andre Miller, you're Kendall Marshall. You're out of the league. We got a problem. Oh, he's the next Charles Barkley. Yeah, then he's Gary Trent. Like, you better have multiple comps. You look at these guys, 6'9", 210, 7-foot wingspan, and runs like the wind. Million comps. And they all survive in the NBA. Taylor Hendricks, worst case scenario, is Robert Covington. Pretty good player. Keyonte George, 6'4", ball handler, million of them. High, like, Leaf likes to talk about Jamal Murray. That's pretty optimistic and would be amazing. To me, worst case scenario, Jared Bayless. It's a good NBA player. Okay? Brice Sensabaugh, 6'6", ball handler, can score. There's a lot of those in this league. That's great. Worst case, I'm not sure on it. The Sensabaugh's got an interesting case where high volume college players usually struggle really badly in the NBA other than Steph Curry because they can't assimilate with their teammates. And so that's going to be his challenge. But like we've had, I mean, Cam Thomas is the most recent reference on him, the kid out of Auburn who scored a bunch of points at Brooklyn this last year. But that's number one. Multiple comps. Like these guys' body and everything about him, like if you're going like Scoot Henderson, which I think is fine, he better be super incredible because his comp is like Donovan Mitchell. And then his next comp at 6'1" gets to be like if you're 6'1", but when you're 6'4", 6'6", or 6'9", and you have the bodies these guys have, now Sensabaugh's a little bigger and wider, but Sensabaugh drops like 10 pounds. He's DeAndre Hunter, and there's a million DeAndre Hunters in the world, right? Like Taylor Hendricks is Jaden McDaniels, like just like that. In Minnesota, he's a pretty darn good player. The second thing, and this is where Leaf and I are super different because like a bunch of the players I listened to that Leaf loves, I didn't like. You have to shoot. You have to shoot. Like we can talk about all these other things about you and you do all these other things and this and that. And like everyone loved Jarice Walker. I don't think he's going to be able to shoot. Like, I mean, very stretch it out. Like maybe I'm wrong. Like I could be like Anthony Black, super concerned about him. I'm not sure he's going to be able to shoot. Like if you can't shoot, you're Michael Carter-Williams. Which was cute. He won Rookie of the Year on a really bad team, but then it didn't really pan out. Like, these guys can all shoot. Sensabaugh's the best shooter in the draft, arguably. Like, if you go look at the numbers with off the bounce and catch and shoot, like Grady Dick's a little bit better, but not many guys. Keyonte George shot terribly in the last 15 games of the season, and we'll talk about him in a minute because I think it's really interesting. He shot 34% from the floor and 30% from three. That's a little concerning. He was playing on a sprained ankle. I think there were some issues at Baylor we'll talk about in a second. But he generally can shoot it, and Leaf has talked about how he's been on his pro day and saw him shoot it. And Taylor Hendricks can just flat shoot it. So that's the second one. I want to shoot it. I have three other things that I want out of draft picks. I'll touch on those next and continue with you on some more specifics on Hendricks, Keyonte George, and Brice Sensabaugh as we continue on today's edition of Locked On Jazz. Thanks so much for tuning back in. It's just a great pleasure to be back with you. I'm actually in St. Louis. My daughter's playing a golf tournament out here. Leaf will be back with you tomorrow. I'll be back with you Friday, and then free agency hits on Friday. So I'll be with you all next week and carrying through until about the 9th of July. So we'll carry you through for the next little while. And you're probably going to miss Leaf. YouTube conversation going on. Which was the biggest news story that I missed? TV deal, THT opting in, John Collins trade, or the draft picks? So multiple comps, shooting, multiple skills. This one's interesting to me. It used to be, Gordon Chase used to say to me, you have to look at a player and have something where you look at him and you say, oh, beep. Like, oh, crap, he's that good. Oh, beep. Like the opposing team preparing for a player has to say, oh, beep. I actually think that's changed now. Now I think and this is multiple skills. And I think this will actually be the biggest question for all three of these guys. So Taylor Hendricks does not have a very good bounce game right now. Does not have a dribble game. He has a play in which we talked about in the episode we did a while back, which was like at 9, should we take Taylor Hendricks? Where he gets guarded by Jarice Walker, who's supposed to be this amazing defensive player, and he swings through, takes a bounce, gets on the rack, and packs it. It's beautiful. It's from like 11 feet out on the left side, maybe 12 feet out. It's beautiful, beautiful play. And it's like, oh, wow, that's NBA, and you get super excited about it. But if he has to take a second or third dribble, he doesn't have it yet. So right now, offensively, he does not have multiple skills. He has shooting, and he has his defensive prowess. So that's multiple skills. You can put him on the floor for multiple things. That's good. But he needs that next one offensive. Keyonte George has a great wiggle. Boom. Like with the handle, wiggle, move, bunch of things of that nature that I think are his skill. And then whether he can create the separation offensively to get his shots. The Arkansas game, he's great to finish. Leaf talked about it the other day. But on the other end, his first 3 shots that day are blocked, which was concerning to me, or 3 of his first 4. So he's still got some things to do in that regard. And then defensively, we'll see where we are. And then Sensabaugh, I think, actually has the whole package and multiple skills offensively. He just has to adapt to not being the man. So multiple skills. The next one is they just got to play hard. Hendricks played really hard. Keyonte George in the game I watched, I thought was wavering a little bit of whether he was playing hard or not. And Sensabaugh, I thought, played really hard. Like, that's a skill. You just have, and you have to have it. Like, if you don't play hard, you don't survive. You don't shoot, you don't play hard, you can't survive in the league. And the last one that I think is most important to all these guys, and it a little bit goes back to the multiple comps thing, is you have to have multiple routes by which you can play. So the opposite is this: if you draft just the point guard or just the center, like they don't have multiple routes to play. And like you think of a Doka Azubuike, who knows what would have happened if he stayed healthy? But he was behind Derek Favors and Rudy Gobert. There was like no route for him to play. It was super hard for him. He couldn't play. Taylor Hendricks can play 4. He can play 5, and he might eventually be able to play 3. Brice Sensabaugh can probably play 2 and 3, and if he learns to defend at 6'6", he probably could play a small ball 4. It's a great shooter. Keyonte George can play a 1, a 2, and he had to play a 3 at Baylor, as Leaf talked about. Like, there's multiple ways these guys can play. I saw somebody breaking down the minutes for our team next year, and, like, it was interesting. Like, they had Hendricks playing, 15 minutes here and 16 minutes here, and they had George playing 10 minutes here and 12 minutes there. Like, that's vital for draft success. Multiple routes by which you can play. So multiple comps, got to be able to shoot, got to have multiple skills, got to play hard, and got to have multiple routes to play. We're pretty, like, multiple comps, knock it out of the park. Shooting, knock it out of the park. Multiple skills, this is going to be the key to development. That's why they didn't go, that's why one of them was taking at 16, the other's taking at 29. Play hard. Okay, let's see it. Like, that's going to be it. And that's high character, and they all seem to be that. The words on Keyonte George's personality, character, things like that are through the roof from the phone calls I've made. And then routes to play. And that's team-centric, but you have to have it to have draft success. Let me talk about each guy for a little bit. And you've heard, if you've been listening this week, you've heard more than I can give you. One of the things I talk about a lot when I watch guys is I want them to jump off the screen. Hendricks jumps off the screen. When he runs, it's incredible. Like, you just don't have a body that moves like that. It's awesome. I think if you go back to listen to the episode I did about 2 weeks ago about Taylor Hendricks at 9, before I fell in love with Kobe Buffkin, was like, I think my first comment is, a guy runs like that, you draft him. Like, you do. You just draft him. You add in the fact that he can shoot, he can protect the rim. Let me say this about the rim protection. I want to see, I'm not totally sold on this on a college basketball to a pro basketball player. And I know block shots and steals usually follow. But when you watch a college game, like Jerice Walker and Taylor Hendricks, I felt this way about both of them. They're like within 8 feet of the basket all the time. So when they're making this quick play to then be secondary rim defender and have this great block shot, it's a sign of brilliant NBA level athleticism. But in the NBA, you've got to make that play from 20 feet because you're spread out and spaced. And you really have to understand the game and what's taking place for you to be able to make that move play from 20 feet out. And I thought when I watched Hendricks, the one thing I thought a little bit on Hendricks was the fact that I didn't think he had an awesome understanding of the game. Feel is probably not the right word. I thought he looked 19. Like, offensively, I thought a lot of times he moved into guys' space and didn't space correctly. That could have been Johnny Dawkins coaching. That also could be his just like lack of quite understanding of what the instinct is to go. And I thought on defense, he's unbelievable, but it was hard for me to tell whether he was just like reacting to the ball or reacting to the play. And I thought he was reacting to the ball a little bit more than he was reacting to the play. Keyonte George to me is super interesting because sometimes I think the last place you should be evaluating these players is college. And the thing about Keyonte George that's so kind of awesome is if you go back and look at his U18 and U19s, I think even a U23, like, he's the best player on every team. He's the best player on those USA teams. He's killing people. And he's the one making the plays. He's the one they go to late on a bunch of these things. He's the one that can create his shot. He does have a super wiggle. And then he goes to Baylor, and he opens the year kind of kicking ass. And by the end of the year, he's not. And I don't know this, but I was told very early in the draft process, I mean, like super early in the draft prospect, I was talking to someone about players, and he said to me, like, there's guys like Keyonte George, this is what they told me, who like have problems in their roster where the veterans aren't really willing to let him become the man. And it becomes really hard for them. And you've got to understand that. I think there might've been some internal stuff at Baylor last year that part of the sprained ankle is certainly part of his 34% shooting and 30% from 3 to close the year. But as Leaf points out, he's playing 3 out of position. And I think there was some locker room reluctance to letting that team become Keyonte George's team. And the only reason I think that is because I was told that. Like, I didn't follow Baylor, but I was told that kind of an offhand, like you hold a million conversations just to get little nuggets. And I can know exactly where I was standing on that day when I got that nugget. It was outside my gym. I got a phone call from someone. I had to take it. I stopped the workout. I went outside. I took the call. I know exactly where I was standing when I had that conversation. It was like this little nugget. And you're like, oh, I'll put that in the back of my head. And now it turns out to be super valuable because of the fact that we have Keyonte George on our roster. On Brice Sensabaugh. So he was one of our numbers guys. He's one of our numbers guys. And I think, I have to look it back up, but I believe we drafted like number 4, number 6, and number 12 on Kevin Pelton's numbers board, which I like. He's had great success with that. Sensabaugh, I kind of love him. Like, honestly, if like Hendricks was 9 and Sensabaugh was 16 and George was 28, like I would just be talking about Sensabaugh with so much excitement. But because of the fact he went 28, like you temper it a little bit because 28 picks, like, well, they could be Desmond Bain. Obviously, there's a knee issue that's been talked about a little bit. 2 meniscus. I think he missed his junior year in high school because of the meniscus. So maybe that's why he slipped. And then from our standpoint, that you just have to manage that, and it's great. There is a little concern on the fact that he has to figure out how to play with teammates, which he didn't do a great deal of at Ohio State. But he's like him. He's got one move. He goes right to get left. It's awesome, though. It's awesome from 3. It's awesome in the mid-range. I think he shot 52% on pull-up mid-range jumpers and 44% on catch-and-shoot threes. It's great. Like, that's bona fide, big-time offensive numbers. I thought Leaf made a great point. He's going to kill Summer League. He could be the real star of Summer League. That was a great point by Leaf on the show. See, I've listened. I really like him. I like bucket getters. I like putting the ball in the hole. Like, I like guys that can shoot. Like, I think Sensabaugh could work his way into the, like, playing. The last thing I'd say on all these guys, they're all 19. Right? Taylor Hendricks and Brice Sensabaugh were AAU teammates. Keyonte George, they're 19. I know we want to thrust them out there right away. But 19-year-olds really struggle in the NBA. And I do believe you can really overplay them. So the next week for the Jazz, I think, is really important because it's super important that we're not forced to play some of these guys. I know we want to see them. We're desperate to see them. They're the future. We're most excited about them. They're the players you want to see. But from a long-term standpoint, we have to make sure that Will Hardy has the ability to choose when and where to play them, and he's not forced to play them. They managed Walker Kessler and Ochai Agbaji perfectly last year. And frankly, Ochai, we pushed well beyond his limits and probably are glad the season ended. Like, I'm not sure Ochai could have done that for much longer. That's what you have to avoid. He learned a lot from it, and we hit the right amount of time of it, and you just didn't want it going much further. So, really, I mean, I really like the 3 picks. Like, I think, hey, Kobe Buffkin going to pick, for me personally, Kobe Buffkin going to pick before, so I was like, and there was a late guy there was somebody late in that first round that I kind of was eyeing as well. Like, it was a funny emotional night for me because I actually watched it the next morning in Scotland, and did not know the results. So I had the full draft experience. And when when Cam Whitmore started sliding and Taylor Hendricks was there, like we got to 9, I was pretty excited. We had Taylor Hendricks, we had Cason Wallace, and we had Kobe Buffkin on the board. I was like, okay, any 3 of those I'm super excited about. And we took Taylor Hendricks. It was awesome. And then I'm watching through 16, and Jett Howard goes, and I'm like, Jett Howard goes, like, the math could work out here that with one pick, one thing Kobe Buffkin gets here, and then Quinn Snyder goes and drafts Kobe Buffkin at 16, and I'm like super bummed. And then we get Keyonte George, and like Keyonte George, we just went through him. Like, he was the best player there for a long time. And then, Nick Smith is dropping and I'm beginning to wonder whether or not there's a Nick Smith move, but I'm also see that Brice Sensabaugh is dropping and pretty excited about those 2. And then Nick Smith goes and we get Brice Sensabaugh, and it was great. And Dariq Whitehead went super early, who I was curious about when he went 22nd. So, and it was interesting to kind of watch the draft also. Like, I think if you go back to some of the draft analysis that we did, like on Leonard Miller, and I was like, I just don't see him as being fluid. Like he ends up slipping in the draft. So interesting. All right. I can keep going. Leaf will be with you tomorrow as I travel back into town. I'll be back with you on Friday. It is Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Thanks so much for tuning in. Great conversation on the YouTube. And for your next listen, go listen to Locked On NBA Big Board.